a master services integrator to support your IT sourcing strategy. My name is David Goodstein, and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It's our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with AT&T. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly tell you about the questions box. We encourage you at any time during the presentation to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving a follow-up email in one day, which will have a link to the recorded webinar and presentation slides. The presentation slides will also be available at outsourcing.com. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'd like to quickly tell you about the Outsourcing Institute. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. The Outsourcing Institute is proud to welcome our facilitator for today's webinar, Peter Pisciotta, Director and Head of ISG's Network Services Practice. Peter has been with ISG for 9 years and has been in the sourcing advisory space for almost 20. During his tenure as a buy-side advisor with ISG, he has worked with dozens of clients with a net contract value of over $12 billion, primarily in managed network services. His contributions to industry-leading positions in pricing, SLAs, and governance have assisted his clients develop sustainable and efficient supplier agreements. Peter?
Thank you, David. Outsourcing has evolved over the years. When ISG invented the the sourcing advisory space about 25 years ago, our clients were large and seeking to divest their entire IT function and shift their entire means of production to a single service provider. The value proposition focused on labor arbitrage and redirecting client resources. But in the last 5 to 10 years, this big O outsourcing model has become increasingly rare. ISG advises on about half of all IT outsourcing transactions above $25 million. In 2005, we recorded a total of 331 transactions. By 2012, the number had more than doubled to 745. However, in 2012, the average contract value had declined 37%, down to $25 million. During that same period, the duration of agreements also declined about 20% to right around 5 years in length. What does this data tell us? Well, the deals are getting smaller and shorter, but our research also tells us that customers are being much more deliberate and specific. For example, managed network services was traditionally bundled into larger sourcing agreements, but since 2010, the number of bundled agreements with managed network services has declined by 11%, while the number of standalone M&S agreements has increased by almost 20%. Customers are carving out M&S from traditional agreements. Customers are also seeing more of the services as non-differentiated or commodity-like services. Improved tools and products means customers are less likely to be challenged by routine engineering tasks, but rather the challenge becomes broad-based integration of the ecosystem, especially as data assimilation requirements have blurred the lines between application and network. The problems facing ISG clients today are more logistical and practical than technical. For example, for a global luxury retailer with 5,000 sites on 5 continents, how to deploy and manage an integrated store-in-a-box solution with digital marketing, Wi-Fi, point-of-sale capabilities. For another client, how to integrate unified communications globally for a highly mobile workforce so that they can operate as efficiently in Milan as they do in Phoenix. Or for a large banking client, how to take 20% of the costs out of ATM banking costs for 10,000 ATM locations. Just as IBM began emphasizing services 25 years ago, AT&T is reinvigorating their services approach as a master integrator. Their goal is to bring a technology-agnostic approach to solving big problems. While not entirely new to AT&T, after all, AT&T has been providing complex outsource-like solutions to customers for well over 20 years, and carriers have been interacting with other global carriers for over 50 years. Our conversations today will focus on why AT&T's integration approach is unique and why it's an important shift in the network services market. With us today from AT&T are Craig Schewe and Jeremy Tudor, market strategy subject matter experts with AT&T. Craig, Jeremy?
Thanks,
I know you're out.
Yes, we're out here. So Craig Schewe, market strategy with AT&T Network Sourcing Integration. I've been with AT&T for over 14 years in this space. Jeremy?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Craig. Hey, Peter. This is Jeremy Tudor. I've been with AT&T for about 13 years, and I'm focused on networks integration and sourcing strategy from a competitive and market strategy perspective. We've got a lot of things going on in this space, and it's really a part of the focus area that's taking off and seeing a lot of growth with regards to customer interaction and interest in this space. So, really want to go ahead and get started today and talk a little bit about, setting the platform for our conversation and kind of give you a quick overview as to what we're going to be talking about. So without further ado, Peter, we'll go ahead and get diving into the material.
That sounds great, Jeremy.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is just spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about where we are today and how we got to this space. And obviously we've got some good interaction that's going to be taking place, and hopefully we can get some questions later on in this discussion. But sourcing and integrated services, what are we really talking about? So, enabling CIOs to focus on business performance, as you take a look at what sourcing the infrastructure really means, we kind of take a look at it from three different perspectives, right? There's the initial thought of achieving operational excellence, which I believe is where everybody typically gets started in this space, on reasons on why you would look at using sourcing in your strategy. And really, you got to think of why you would do that. And the idea is to achieve more operational efficiencies by focusing on cost, right? Think of the concept of coming in and having somebody else doing the same service for a lot less cost. And why is that the case? Because you're leveraging somebody else's assets to achieve that, right? Somebody else who has made it their core business to really focus on the IT infrastructure and quite honestly may be able to provide a much more efficient use of resources to achieve that infrastructure excellence and operational excellence. The second primary reason somebody looks at engaging in sourcing is really to achieve some type of innovative advancement, right? Some type of movement into, for instance, mobile and IP technology, thinking of key applications that can be used. But it's not from a perspective of taking advantage of new technology. It's still more of a focus on creating higher performance at lower cost, right? And that's where we really dive into the third category of sourcing, and that's really when companies look to utilize new technologies, and that's the fun stuff. That's where everybody really wants to play. The challenge there is trying to establish the value that new technology is going to be bringing to the table, and not only from a applying that technology in this space, but really from a how do we apply that. And as we talk about this is where we really start talking about the new model that we're focused on, which is the integration model, right? The integration as a services model, more importantly. And that's really what we want to set the tone for today's conversation. Craig, I'm going to ask you to take it on the next piece of information to kind of explain the maturity of sourcing, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, so Peter had actually referenced a lot of these good points that I'm going to go over in his introduction, but really it's important to understand the maturity of sourcing. And if you look historically over time, we're going to start, and this model is really to show you kind of where did sourcing start, what were the underpinnings of why were people doing it, and where is it today, and what are the needs in the marketplace. So the first thing you look at is there are different levels of maturity that deliver different types of value to different organizations, and that's even as Jeremy referenced. The first part is, and customers who are really looking at very large and complex deals where sourcing providers were coming in and taking over the entire IT infrastructure environment. Take over my operations provider and do it for less, because you can do it for less than I can with your people. That includes traditional large global companies, multinationals, and it was a very successful model. So as Jeremy referenced in his last slide, that changed and evolved to where people were actually coming to the market and looking for different things. In this case, it's innovation, so benchmarking innovation. How can I do the things that I do in my environment today and do them more efficiently and more effectively? So the evolution of that went to risk sharing and gain sharing. And what I mean by that is shared responsibilities amongst the carrier, or actually the provider or partner, if you want to call them, and the organization, the customer. The customer is going to focus on what they do very well and focus their people on that. And they're going to focus the provider, the person that they've signed that contract with, and let them do that. So they're going to operationalize the components that they don't want to do. They don't want to own it. They don't want to own that infrastructure. They want to just get stringent SLAs and government model in place and let the provider provide those elements to them, and they can focus on running their business. So as IT environments got much more complex, we saw really the introduction of the next two I'm going to lump together, and that's the co-sourcing and multi-sourcing. So co-sourcing is where there's really been a rise of, because the environments have gotten much more complex, there's been a rise of the niche players. Increasing complexity in the IT providers who can specialize and support custom requirements for the business. The customer retains some or all of, or some of their environment, and the provider retains some of that environment. And in multi-sourcing, what happens is you've got a lot of niche players, and there are a lot of people who are focused. You might have one in the server, in the virtualization space. You might have one in the security space, and the list goes on and on. So it's kind of come full circle, because at the top of this chart is integration as a service. So now you have a multi-sourcing environment. You have several providers in an environment doing things very well, but really what's important is what's next. How do you leverage the power of an operationally sound outsourced environment to achieve even more? The evolution of sourcing is capabilities integration, taking that traditional sourcing model to a new level. So let's go to slide 5.
Those are really good points. Yeah, Peter, those are really good points, Craig. I mean, that's exactly what we've noticed in the market, over the last 10 years, and it's really gained some momentum in the last couple of years. Certainly the integration layer has become the challenge for many clients. Is how do they, break down those tower and stovepipe-like organizations and really get them to work in synchronicity. So those are all good points. Thanks.
Yep, thanks. So that leads us to our next slide. So, now that we've kind of understood integration as a service, we're looking at, okay, how has managed services really evolved? So Peter had mentioned that too, as far as kind of segmenting these out in the different models that customers are utilizing managed services. So I think it's important to understand kind of the evolution of the managed services continuum. So on the next slide, you'll see that starts on the bottom with kind of the traditional sense. And again, I kind of look at this as, how does the market look at managed services? So it starts with traditional premise-based services like managed CPE or customer premise equipment, which include routers, switches, network probe solutions. It can include managed internet-related IP services. So one thing to recognize here is, if you see the arrow on the far right, it talks about an evolution, if you will, an integration as a service. What's really happening in the trend in the market is that traditional premise-based services have moved into the software space. So companies really are realizing efficiencies, and that requires innovation as a service to correlate all of those elements. So you move up to the next piece, and it's premise-based equipment. So people are, they had the traditional IP. Customers still sometimes want those things to be on site at their prem for whatever reason that is. So you have a managed IP PBX, handsets, the telephony environment, managed LAN and wireless LAN environment, and then business in a box. Peter, you had mentioned that. So a lot of companies have small or remote locations that still have the requirements of voice data IP that they need to deliver and have access back to corporate resources. And then if you actually go up that stack once again, look at managed VPN services. VPN and actually access in VPN or virtual private network services have grown much more complex. and thus the need for providers to offer managed VPN services. Things like adding a level of security and class of service and quality of service, because really everything is being carried over the same pipe. You know, two cans in a string. You got voice, data, IP, and they all require a complex VPN structure around it and more specialized management capabilities. Add in, you know, performance requirements. You know, we want to have efficiency and effective way to operate that environment, so you have WAN acceleration services. Also, companies like the business in a box we just referenced, you have remote access. You have remote workforces, people working from home, contact center employees, things like that, or actually very small locations where they actually need to access the company's VPN. So, and now we move into kind of how this business has evolved and where I said everything is going software-based. Look at managed security, which is wrapped around all of these elements, and then the application space. A lot of times customers historically have wanted to own the application space, whether they own the platform or whether they own the application themselves that really serves the business side. A lot of customers now are looking to have a roadmap into the cloud, and they're looking at video applications. They're looking at, you know, voice over IP, call center or contact center elements, voicemail, even hosting and cloud services. And there's a huge push, as many are aware, one of the largest growing components in every company is the mobility side.
So Craig, a quick question for you on this. You know, managed WAN solutions have been around for a number of years and is a really mature offer. We're seeing that voice and security are somewhere, voice is close to that, kind of that getting towards top of that adopter phase. Security is a little bit, you know, lower down and a little bit more of the early adopter piece. What trends are you seeing within AT&T, and what size clients, and what's your target market? Maybe you can speak a little bit to what your targets are and what you're seeing in the market as far as adoption.
What I've really seen, I guess, Peter, good questions, and there's several in there. What I've really seen is that there's been an evolution. So a lot of customers are trying to figure out, where do I dip my toe in the water? Where do I look? I know I need to go into the managed services space. I know I need to dip my toe into some type of sourcing solution, but where do I jump in? And, you know, if you kind of look at this list on slide 6, the managed services continuum, that's where people are trying to figure out. People are able to do, when you look at integration as a service, they're actually able to jump into that sourcing game without having to outsource their entire IT environment. Some customers want to have some of those components, and they don't need to be huge multinational global companies. They're companies that have specific needs and specific requirements, and they're able to do that by leveraging an integrator, a master integrator, if you will.
Well, good, thank you.
So on to slide 7 with Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks. And Peter, that's a really good question, because, you know, I don't think it's relevant to size at this point, because we've seen anywhere from small to medium-sized businesses, again, try to take the approach that Craig was outlining, and it's more of a, you know, I realize where I can make the biggest impact, but how do I get started, right? You know, what do I do if I've never done this before? We've also seen it come from the other angle, where you've got large organizations who have an outsourced infrastructure for the most part, trying to determine how to take that infrastructure to the next level. And really, what we've determined based on the amount of work we've seen in the marketplace and the trending in the marketplace, it's kind of irrelevant of size, because what we're truly talking about is the integration as a service model. Right, and it's a nice lead into this next piece of information that we're sharing, because what that model is if you compare it to a traditional product or service model, right? Typically, as a consumer myself, I'd go out and I'd do my research, and I'd find the service or the product that I would like to buy. I would have a salesperson help me out with it, tell me a little bit more about the specs and the details, buy the service. They might offer some type of installation help. And then after that, you've got maybe a customer service number to call if you have questions, right? That's your typical product sell that you find out there. What this model actually does is it's about a partnership as you can get without formalizing a structured partnership. So what this means is it goes from, concept to life cycle if you're looking at the material that's on the screen. But it takes all these steps from concept to life cycle management and takes into consideration each one of these items that you see below this, right? Continuity across all phases is what we're talking about. So not only is it qualifying what we're trying to do here and finding the right services or technologies that need to be integrated into environment, it's taken into consideration how this is going to be governed, right? From the planning to the deployment and then to the management piece of it. So after this thing is installed, or after these capabilities are installed, it's how it's going to be managed moving forward. Is it a shared responsibility? Is it a service provider's responsibility? Or is it, the customer's responsibility, all based off of really what the customer is looking to achieve? So looking across all of these stages, you're thinking around things of, how is this going to be a cultural match within the organization? What changes may need to occur? What about the risk management side of it? What is at risk by making these changes? What are we looking to gain? How do we measure that? How do we collaboratively apply a metrics program that would allow us to take a look at that and evaluate it throughout the entire deployment and management piece of this pie? What about user adoption? What is that going to look like? What satellites are surrounding that subject, and what do we need to manage moving forward to make sure that users are able to utilize the servicing technology like it's intended to be? So really what it comes down to is the key word of governance, right? So the integration of the service model differs in the fact that it allows you to apply that governance across all phases. The integration of the service model allows customers to take advantage of that asset base that allows them to, can provide the continuity across the planning and the deployment and the management phase and the ongoing management of that. Not only how it's being applied today, but as we look around the corner to what's coming up in the industry or the marketplace for the customer in the future, is this solution going to be flexible enough? And if so, how do we manage it to make sure we take advantage of that flexibility? So, Peter, does that kind of give you an idea as to how we're applying that in the different customer-sized bases?
Yeah, it does. We did have one question from the audience just asking for perhaps a little bit more detail on exactly how the master integrator, and I think it may be further in your presentation, but just exactly how the master integrator approach, maybe some of the tools or some of the differences, and how that dovetails into integration as a service. So this may not be bad to talk about it, or perhaps even the next slide.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect timing, perfect segue for the question. So, David, I think that's on slide 8, if I'm not mistaken. If not, we can skip to it. Yep, it is. It's slide 8. Perfect. So as we take a look at what it really means from a visual perspective, right, I'm a visual guy, and it's more about applying the integration as a service platform and using a master service integrator to really apply this platform for the customer's benefit. Now, the master service integrator was not a term that we coined, but it was actually something that somebody had written about us, and we kind of ran with it and kind of tried to, put more definition around what that means. David, if you wouldn't mind going back to slide 7, slide 8, sorry. And what it really means is the connected services as it applies to the infrastructure of people, processes, tools, and client servicing, right? And we talked about it earlier, meaning, there's all these changes happening in the industry, all these changes where, traditional hardware components are now becoming applications or software that sits somewhere in a data center that can be accessed and utilized by companies. How do you apply that, right? How do you integrate that into your environment? Well, there's a whole slew of services that have to be applied and applied efficiently and consistently to make all of this come together. So the traditional sourcing model that you see here, it really revolves around the people, processes, tools, and the client servicing, right? That's the foundation of the sourcing model. But now, whether that infrastructure is outsourced or whether it's something that's in control of the customer themselves, right, or it's co-sourced for that matter, really what you're looking at doing is tapping into these services that you see surrounding this donut, if you will, and tapping into the connected services. How do you leverage these effectively in this environment, and not only leverage them, but how do you integrate them efficiently, right? And it goes back to that whole concept of plan, deploy, and manage, right? So you think about things like global procurement and logistics. What this really means is, how do I take advantage of a global platform, and how do I integrate those capabilities as efficiently as possible into my own infrastructure to take advantage of it, right? The retail market space would be a great example of an industry that's constantly looking to take their business into new marketplaces, but you have to be able to do that efficiently. Why not leverage somebody else's assets, right? Rather than trying to build it on your own, this is a model that allows you to tap into assets that are there that are already proficient at doing that, and it's something that allows customers to really take advantage of that. And the integration as a service model that's used for this, right, allows that end-to-end planning. What the master service integrator itself does is it provides a very robust catalog of connected services that can be integrated into an infrastructure such as this. So as you go around the circle, and I won't take the time to name off every single one of them, I think everybody can see this on their own, you can start to visualize how some of these services and some of these capabilities would really make an impact to your infrastructure, And as we approach it from an AT&T perspective, what we actually like to leverage is the fact that, not only do we have the global platform, but we have a network that seems to be able to provide this connectivity. And now we're wrapping our master service integrator model around it using the integration as a service platform. It really is starting to take hold, and our customers are starting to figure out where that value proposition is, right? Something that they can very easily take advantage of based off an existing relationship. Does that help to explain it, Peter? Is that what you're looking for?
It does, but let me also maybe drill down a little bit, because in my mind, integration, it's really, who takes responsibility for accomplishment. Is the master integrator model, kind of maybe breaking down some of those lines traditionally in telco and carrier, customers are used to certain network services having a lot of players, global providers for different access, et cetera, equipment, break-fix providers. Is the goal to, kind of accept more responsibility? I know some customers in the past have had some, challenges in trying to get a global, network responsibility. Maybe you can kind of talk towards that.
Yeah, if I'm hearing your question correctly, right? It's what's truly different about this model and how we're approaching it. So the concept here is, you're never going to find a single source provider for everything that you're looking for your infrastructure, and it probably even more importantly, it's near impossible to find a global provider, right, of a single source. What we figured out in working with our clients is that there is a lot of opportunity as clients seek to take advantage of the value of our native products, right, AT&T services. There's a lot of value that we bring to the table by enabling our customers to tap into that rich catalog of resources that we have and assets, globally connected around the world. Our challenge was, trying to illustrate and have our customers understand that we now have a model that allows them to more efficiently take advantage of that connected base, right? You're not really going to find that in a traditional reseller environment, I guess you would say, because, again, it all goes back to the underlying infrastructure of the plan, deploy, and manage platform. And the continuity that goes across those stages comes from the AT&T resource being that single source connectivity to all these pieces, right? That means that there's governance from our level across all of these. So it no longer becomes a traditional reseller of let me introduce you to so-and-so, this is what they do, you guys can take it from here. This truly is let's plan this together. Let's see what it's going to look like. Let's figure out how to govern this. Let's figure out how to implement these services and capabilities. And even before we do that, let's look at how this is going to be managed once it's put into place, leveraging all through your AT&T resource as the ability to do that. Does that answer your question there, Peter? I think I got your question right.
Yeah, it does, and I think your next slide is on a case study, so maybe we can kind of even kind of continue some of the drill down, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've what's the next example? I think we've got a hosted call center. Yeah, okay. Oh, excuse me, global broadband logistics. Yeah, actually, it's a really good example. I know we included a couple in there, so I want to make sure we got the right one. This is a great example of a global platform, right? So as we take a look at this use case, and hopefully everybody can see this on the screen, it really outlines a couple of key components, right? This was a global company who manufactures and distributes industrial gases around the world, right? And you can see for yourself the details of how big it is and how many locations they had. But one of the things that they struggled to do as they had two objectives. One was to support remote global locations, right? And the other was to support locations that may be remote with minimal bandwidth requirements, but there was a need for connectivity. The connectivity subject on its own is complex enough, but where they figured out that they were struggling was in each one of the regions around the world, there was a different provider to work with. There was a different pricing model. How do we establish the professional services that are needed in each location to make sure that any on-site work is taken care of? What about day 2 support? What do we do if we need to produce a move, add, or a change associated with any one of these locations? And what it came down to was, fortunately this was already an AT&T customer, and it came down to them just kind of outlining this struggle that they were having. And we sat down and we designed a global broadband logistics as a service platform for them on a global scale. And what that allowed them to do was really tap into a platform that we established that allowed for, almost, dare to say, predictive pricing, right? So they knew exactly what they were going to be getting in the different regions. It allowed us to go in and say, we can handle all of those services that are associated with getting that broadband connectivity, turning it up, testing it, making sure that on-site work is done for you, making sure that day 2 support is ready to roll. And by the way, if we needed to move or add or change any of this information, again, it's not you chasing down all of these providers and service providers in these regional areas. This is us tapping into our asset base, saying, let's leverage our existing relationships, which we already have from a global perspective, and let's figure out how to make that work for our customers, right? So the last piece of that really was about creating that end-to-end deployment and then what it's going to look like to be managed moving forward. And what it provided for the customer was a more simplistic way to support remote locations, open up new locations, manage locations. It provided that governance. There's that key wording, and that governance across all the phases of how we roll this out. It also provided the governance of how we work in these different regions, right? So there may be different cultural needs in each region. There may be different labor needs in each region as we approach professional services in those areas. The good news is, with our connected assets and the way that we're established, we were able to pass that along as a service to our customers, meaning we're already established in those cultures. We're established in those areas. We know how to do business in those areas, which may not be something that the customer knows how to do. And it's an asset, a shared asset they can now take advantage of through our as-a-service model.
Okay. What are the 2 or 3 things that are different today under the master integrator model than might have been in years past? I mean, is it that you're more agnostic, that you look for the best provider, maybe in a even I was thinking China, a distant location, but it may be even if there's a off the beaten path location here in the U.S. I mean, what are some of the key differences that you really want to stress under the master integrator model?
I could take a stab at that, or Craig, if you've got a good answer for it. I know you've been sitting by.
I'll tell you what, I think that kind of actually leads into our next, if it needs into our next slide, and I think I can answer the question and actually cover the components that are in the slide as far as the use case entitled Hosted Call Center as a Service. So Peter, kind of to talk about provider agnostic. So, don't just think about it in network provider terms. Think about it in, any term as far as with whether it be an equipment provider, whether it be an application provider or a network provider. So we have several customers where we found, it's fairly common that they're going to utilize several vendors across their different solutions that are provided them in their environment. And as a master integrator, to answer your question earlier, there's certainly a requirement to be able to work with all of those. So utilize existing and long-standing relationships, whether it be, different access providers or different, like Jeremy had said, we can't provide services everywhere in the world, but we continue to grow our footprint. We've been able to do that or accomplish that because we have forged relationships in many different parts of the world to grow our network, and that we have strategic partnerships and alliances that we've formed so we can deliver an end result, which is better coverage for our customers. In that same vein, if you look at it across different providers from an equipment perspective, it takes us into this use case, and specifically hosted call centers. So same company we're talking about, over 20,000 employees. They're global. They sell industrial chemicals and gases. This customer had a huge need to basically enjoy cost savings and increase productivity in their two main call center areas, which included EMEA or Europe and Asia-Pac. They had two very large call centers, and they actually own the structures, the equipment, all of the people and resources to actually service their customers in these regions where they have large amounts of business. So they came to us as a master integrator, that being AT&T, to look at how can we do this more efficiently, effectively. Can you plan it, like deploy, actually deploy this solution and then manage it afterwards and take it out of our hands. So a little bit more of a deep dive into this. One of the providers was Avaya. So Avaya actually had a very large and complex call management system, the modular messaging, the voicemail, and the actual handsets in their environment that was their call center. And also that connected to over a voice over IP solution and manage our MPLS network that included a lot of a Cisco infrastructure. So we had two different providers who actually specialized very much so in their different practices, and we had to integrate both of those solutions together to deliver that to a customer. What we did is we actually took them out of their regular brick and mortar structures, migrated them, built a path. We planned, we deployed, built a path for them, and migrated them into call centers into both Asia-Pac and Europe, and actually hosted that equipment virtually. So kind of like in some of my past slides where I talked about people are virtualizing their environments, they don't want to own that equipment anymore. We were able to do that. We were able to migrate the equipment, assume responsibility for it, and own it, and provide that as a service to the customer. So all the moves, adds, changes, the day-to-day MACDs, the monitoring, the help desk, the hosting, firmware, dot releases, and even the project management, all was taken over by AT&T as the master integrator. So that really was a huge win for both sides of the equation. So the customer was able to, focus on delivering a call center experience or an experience to their customers, and they were able to be very efficient in their operations, where we were able to help them take over the operational piece of that and deliver it as a service. So it was a win-win.
Good, good. Well, let's move on to the next one, and maybe we'll get some questions in it. I think we're coming up on the last slide, and maybe look to the audience for some questions. You'll open it up for some questions and answers.
All right, thanks. And Peter, I know we've had an opportunity to talk a number of times, so I appreciate all the good questions about the master service integrator model, because I think that really is a differentiator for us, and it truly is a differentiator for customers as well, as they seek to take advantage of capabilities and services and technologies that you traditionally go out shopping for on your own, and trying to figure out how to implement it and then manage it on your own. That truly is a struggle when you get down to it. In answering that question of how do I get started, right? That seems to be, out of all the boardroom discussions we have, out of all the conversations we have with customers who are seeking to take advantage of a sourced infrastructure or sourced capabilities, or simplifying their infrastructure, it always comes back to the same point, right? The stopping point is how do we get started? You know, where do we get started? You know, what do we do to take advantage of this? We know we need it. We know that we can gain efficiencies and benefits from it, but what do we do, right? And really, that's what makes the integration as a service model so special. And you tie that into the master service integrator model, right? And you can see the visual here. What we truly believe the difference is when you're talking about a master service integrator is the ability to plan, deploy, and again, manage services and capabilities as you look to integrate them into your infrastructure, not only from a domestic perspective, but from a global infrastructure, right? Marrying that with the scale and the experience and the skills of a robust global platform truly does allow customers to take advantage of the model and gain the efficiencies and the benefits they're looking to gain by integrating services and capabilities and technology. So as you take a look around the marketplace for where you can find these capabilities and how you get these services into your infrastructure, the challenge is working with a provider who can provide you with everything that you need from a scale and experience and skill perspective, right? Somebody who's got the platform that can deliver this around the world or wherever you might be trying to deliver this. But more importantly, the ability to provide governance and continuity across all of those phases. That's really going to be a key benefit. And as we tie that into the master service integrator model, using integration as a service, that's truly what we feel the differentiator is and what the value is to the marketplace. Peter, I think we've gotten through the material that we had, so I appreciate all the great questions there.
Good. I do have a couple more questions that came in. Service levels, always an important topic. I will tell you my observation, being a kind of buy-side advisor, I think, AT&T has done it appears that they've gone back and done some kind of actuarial approach to looking at service levels and have actually advanced, have one of the more advanced positions on service levels that I've detected in the industry. So a little bit of accolades to you, but it's a passionate topic for customers in the sourcing conversation. How does the topic of service levels change? Have you looked at them differently, expanded them? One of the challenges is how does an integrator take responsibility for something beyond what they, for a third party, for example? Have you thought about how that's changing for AT&T in the master integrator model and what impacts those might have for a customer?
Peter, is that a question from me, myself, or Craig?
Or? Jeremy or Craig, either one.
I mean, Jeremy, I can take a stab at it. So, service level agreements, you're right. They've certainly evolved, and I think because we continually debate, and I can only give you our perspective. We continue to evolve to be able to offer more and more services through through alliances that we have with different niche players, and we can deliver an end-to-end solution. With that, you're right, we've evolved in the way that we've looked at SLAs. So SLAs, you're right in bringing up an actuary scenario. SLAs aren't designed to pay out a customer, on the provider side, they're not designed to pay out a customer credits for not being able to deliver. So you have to really strike a fine balance, and that's through communicating with the customer on the specific type of service or the advisor like yourself. To find a happy medium to where are we able to deliver excellent service and an excellent experience through whatever service we're providing, at the same time being reasonable. So it's not just an exercise in how many credits do we owe you at the end of each month. And again, that's not easy, and it's always going to be specific to the type of service that's being provided. But what we've really tried to do is strike a balance as far as really more focused on the customer experience and on the delivery to that customer.
Okay. Thank you. There's also some questions from the audience. Question on security as a service, or how does that integrate within the master service integrator? How do you bring that in? And I'll kind of maybe lead that a little bit. Traditionally, I think security has been viewed, without going too technical, but there's a customer retains a certain policy. They develop some policies based on their business in some of those pieces, and then looks for the integrator to enforce that. How have you expanded that? Because I know AT&T has had security offerings for quite some years. What are some of the changes within the master integrator model, and without going too technical or product specific?
Sure. Yeah, it's a tough question because each scenario is a little bit different. I don't think it's a tough question to answer, but as you take a look at how many different scenarios there are out there, you really have to kind of put this in perspective. But what our model really does, and again, it goes back to tapping into the assets that we have that are applicable here, is we've also got a consulting piece, right? So the first thing that we try to do is truly understand what the liabilities are and what the risks are that the security feature is trying to solve, right? Going into the planning and deploying and manage, again, you got to think about this. This is not a product sale, so it's not just saying, oh, well, is a problem outside the firewall, or is it inside the firewall? Great, we have a product, or behind the firewall, we have a product to solve for that. We truly try to understand what is today's issue, what might be tomorrow's issue, and how's it going to be managed moving forward. So using our connected assets of the consulting services that we have internally, we would go out and assess the situation, right, and offer some type of solutions which can be managed moving forward that would help address all facets of the scenario. What we don't want to assume is that somebody automatically thinks they know the answer. They already have the pieces in place, but now it's just a matter of managing those pieces. We want to make sure that that the customer walks away with the feeling that allows them to sleep at night, knowing that it's not just about today, it's about what's coming tomorrow, and we've applied all the resources that we have and the expertise that we can to making sure that what's in place today will provide us with the flexibility for tomorrow. I know that's somewhat of a vague answer, but again, each scenario is going to be a little bit different. So what we would attempt to do, of course, is look at our native services that are in the area that can be applied, that are very easily integrated into the space. And if the requirements are such that it requires to go out of the native services, then that's where we begin to leverage our connected assets, right? These are assets that could possibly be used within the AT&T infrastructure itself with applications that are applicable in the marketplace. I think the idea and the overarching answer to your question, Peter, is the fact that if you're looking at a security solution, or you're looking at some type of managed security capability or feature that needs to be applied in an environment, you're going to find very few people that you can turn to that have a very comprehensive view of how that impacts a network infrastructure on a global scale. The list gets very small when you start really whittling it down to it. So the last piece that I would add to that is then you add the complexity of now how do you integrate that capability and service into your space, not only for today, but again, it's managing that for the future. So that's where we apply the integration as a service model to really help tie that all together. And that creates a very, very finite list of resources that somebody's going to be able to tap into and use to address those security concerns. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think, just thinking as you were answering there, Jeremy, that there's I've seen a lot of different models. Some customers have their own, core security operations center. Some customers use a third party, and some will use somebody such as an AT&T. So, I'm guessing that the master integrator model would be able to play more comfortably regardless of how a customer chooses to address those. Peeking behind also have a couple of questions, peeking behind the curtain just a little bit on how this would look from the customer perspective to actually purchase, contract for master integrator model. Maybe you can talk, and maybe it's again case by case, but a little bit on whether these are contracts that kind of subcontract. When you say connected resources, are these agreements you have in place with partners or other providers? Are they ones that you would build on a more custom base? Or is it something that you would, a client would contract with a third party, and AT&T would then provide oversight or management, or is it yes, yes, yes?
Is it yes, yes, yes? I think the safe answer is yes, 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 right?
Yeah, yeah, but it has
yeah.
I mean, yeah,
Sure.
I think one of the challenges for customers is, especially in telco and network services, is they end up with, I've had customers, large customers end up with hundreds of underlying contracts. Can this model reduce that or lessen the pain?
Yeah, I mean, Peter, to kind of answer there's a lot of questions in that, and I'll try to answer them all. So, what does this look like from a contract perspective? From a contract perspective, typically what we see on the AT&T side is there's a master services agreement in place that has common terms and conditions. When there's an engagement, the important piece is to capture a scope of work, or what's actually included in, defining what is going to be delivered to the customer and how. And typically there's terms and conditions located within that that'll govern that engagement that will actually roll up to the overall agreement. So a customer may have IP services, data, and voice with an AT&T. They want to incorporate additional services like a master integrator type of model. So that scope of work would roll up to the overarching umbrella of the master services agreement. So that's how we would actually govern. Now, you can have several scopes of work. You could have something that has to do with security. You could have something that has to do with staff augmentation, and the list goes on and on if you think of the pinwheel. But that is a simplified model that we found has worked very well for customers, because it's almost like a bolt-on. It's a bolt-on agreement that goes onto an existing agreement already in place. And that actually is if there are specific terms and conditions that need to be added for that engagement, we can do it that way. And that has worked very effectively.
Okay, good. I think that's helpful. I also have a question. If somebody has an existing agreement for a cloud service, and I believe they're asking if it is with a third party, somebody who's not AT&T and not themselves, so infrastructure as a service, how would that work? And actually I have a client now who's looking at actually has an arrangement with a data center, more of a lights out facility, and is looking to go to an outsourced arrangement with another provider. If that were AT&T under this master services integrator, would you assume management of those resources within that original data center, that outcast data center, third-party data center? Or how would that work in that type of environment? So either one. So basically, AT&T becomes a master integrator. Client has an existing relationship with another third party for an outsourced cloud services in a third party's data center. Would you then manage those resources? How would that work?
Yeah, I think your standard graduate answer here applies is it depends, right? So it really comes down to the individual scenario and what components are looking to be managed. Absolutely, we have a multi-carrier solutions that we provide, right, where we speak the language of the carriers, so it's much easier for us to speak that language directly with other carriers and find out what pieces can be managed, across the platform. The other thing is you're talking specifically from a data center perspective, right, in the virtualized services. Again, it's kind of exploratory as to what specific services we're talking about. And exactly what the customer is looking to manage. But the answer there would be yes, right, depending on what types of services need to be managed. There is a potential for bringing in the needed capabilities and services, right, whether it be professional services, whether it be management oversight, whether it be some type of integration work that needs to be done. The question is really just too broad to drill down and say yes in all scenarios, yes in some scenarios, or no in all scenarios. It really comes down to the specific application.
Yeah, and Peter, not knowing the specifics behind, so it sounds like a very specific question, but so in this scenario, you have a customer who's in a data center themselves. They want to get out of the data center management business. The answer is yes, we definitely could come in and manage that scenario. We could either provide people on site or we could provide people remotely, but the intent at the end of the day would be to utilize our own assets eventually to provide the customer a virtualized environment or actually to migrate them to our hosted environment. And again, as an integrator, what we found is sometimes building that roadmap and the consulting piece that Jeremy referenced is important. So yes, we can take over your current environment and manage that for you, whether it be on site or whether it be remote or a hybrid of both, and then even build you a roadmap to basically evolve you or migrate you out of that environment to a much more effective and innovative approach to where we could virtualize part of it. So whether it be your servers, your mainframe, Citrix environment, whether it be the people, the break-fix, rack and stack servers, those types of things, yes, we can approach all of those, and it's going to be different in each case.
Okay, that's great. Well, gentlemen, we're pretty close to the top of the hour. I thought I'd turn it back on over to if there are any final comments, or turn it over to David to wrap things up.
Yeah, I just want to thank Jeremy and Craig for the presentation, and also thank Peter for moderating this session. Thank you, everybody listening in, wherever you may be. Thank you, and have a great day.